Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. And we're also going to have a look at the ongoing crisis between Iran and Israel. And are we looking at another major conflict in the Middle East? So first, in regards to the Ukraine, things continue to be very challenging for the Ukrainian military. For all intents and purposes, the Ukrainian military has been broken to the northwest of Avdiivka. Russian troops continue to drive in a northwesterly direction towards Pokrovsk. This city here. This appears to be the Russian objective at this point. We're also seeing near the town of New York and Toretsk, this area here, a double envelopment operation is ongoing that is encircling Ukrainian troops located just to the east, southeast, and northeast of the settlement of New York. And as you can see here on the map, again, this is a Ukrainian-sponsored website. The information tends to be a little bit more dated in favor of Ukrainian forces, but nonetheless, we use this site as it's regularly updated. So let's have a look at what has happened over the past few days. And we're going to go back essentially about a week or so and let you, the viewer, see what has occurred northwest of Avdiivka. So watch, especially in this sector, as the Russian forces continue to push forward. And the drives continue. Now, additionally, over the course of the last approximately 7 days, the Russians have hit Ukrainian forces with approximately 600 GLONASS guided glide bombs. These bombs have a weight of anywhere from 500 to as much as 6,000 pounds. Obviously, the vast majority of the GLONASS guided glide bombs that are being used by the Russians are in that 500 to 1,000 pound category. But nonetheless, hundreds are being used per week against Ukrainian forces, and it's taking a definite toll. Now, we have continued to hear about Ukrainian recruiting woes. Very few people right now are volunteering for the Ukrainian military. We have talked about the average age of a Ukrainian soldier being almost 40 years old. Think about that for a second. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier, and a Ukrainian soldier on the front line, the average age for a Ukrainian combat death is about just under 40 years old. That's incredible. That's really unprecedented in the history of warfare that this is happening. And it really kind of shows you what is happening in Western societies. This millennial and what would essentially be Generation X, in terms of the Ukrainians, are the only people that sounds like they're actually willing to fight. The current Gen Z generation in the Ukraine, most of which is in hiding or have fled the country. They did get an initial uptick in volunteers when the war started, but that flow of volunteers have been completely cut off. And we have reports of Ukrainian police, special units of the Ukrainian National Guard and security forces, intelligence services, going around rural Ukraine and snatching up people and pressing them into military service. Now, some of these individuals may have had valid call up for service and have defied that order. It's difficult to say, but nonetheless, it is happening. Now, I want to read an article in the Times. Now, it is very difficult right now to get accurate information from the front lines. The Ukrainians themselves, the Ukrainian state, the Ukrainian military, really tend to report bloated numbers in terms of casualties that they are inflicting upon the Russians. We believe that the actual casualty toll that the Ukrainians are inflicting upon the Russians is actually much lower than what is being reported. We also believe that the Russians, and this is based off simply the Russians have a larger air force. And when you're dropping that many bombs on 600 aim points per week, again, 600 glide bombs being used, the casualty rates are simply going to be higher. When a bomb strikes a building or a fortification or a bunker, oftentimes it's difficult to recover bodies. But that is what is happening. And the Ukrainians aren't able to respond in kind. Yes, you hear about the ATACMS strike here and there. You will hear about long-range strikes hitting Russian forces in the Crimea and other areas along the front line and behind the line of contact. But ultimately, they don't have the same fire capacity as the Russians. So when you don't have that same kind of fire capacity, when you can't drop 600 glide bombs on your adversary, your casualties are going to be higher. It's simple fact. All right, here's the Times article. Ukraine is conscripting thousands more troops, but are they ready? Large numbers of recruits will arrive at the front line in the coming weeks, soldiers and military analysts said, but some are poorly trained or out of shape. Ukraine's campaign to replenish its war-weary troops is ramping up and should help fill out personnel gaps on the front line in the coming weeks, according to the Ukrainian officials, soldiers, and military analysts. The mobilization push has so far not significantly bolstered Ukrainian forces on the battlefield, those people say. Many conscripts are still completing the weeks-long training process and have yet to reach the front. And some recruits who have arrived are not physically fit for combat, members of Ukrainian units have noted. But several brigades deployed on the battlefield have reported an increase in the number of conscripts they have received in the recent weeks. They said they were hoping that the influx of soldiers would help Ukraine to stabilize the front line this summer. Press officer for the 33rd Mechanized Brigade said on Friday that his unit had received more quote-unquote newbies this month than they had at the beginning of the year. And today was told that more are coming to us, he added. The Ukrainian authorities have decided to share conscription figures, arguing that, the Ukrainian authorities have declined to share conscription figures, arguing that the information is confidential. So again, the Ukrainians don't share conscription figures, and what they mean by conscription is non-volunteers, individuals pressed into service. They are made to go to the front line and fight. Again, only a handful of volunteers are actually showing up. Now, that is different in Russia. Russia has a plethora of individuals that are being very well paid and trained to show up and fight. So that's changing the dynamic of this conflict. Three military experts with knowledge of the figures said that Kiev had been drafting up to 30,000 people a month since May, when a new conscription law took effect. That is 2 to 3 times more than during the last winter months, they said, and about the same number that the Russian army is recruiting each month. That figure could not be independently confirmed. That's important. The expert spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the confidential numbers. Press officer of the 65th Brigade, which is fighting in southern Ukraine, said the situation is slightly improving compared to the end of 2023, when there was a severe shortage of people. Small groups of conscripts are now trickling into his unit every week, he noted, but our needs still exceed the number of people we're getting. Troop shortages have been one of Ukraine's biggest problems on the battlefield for the past year. Russian forces have managed to break through weakened Ukrainian lines by overwhelming them with waves of ground assaults. Now, that is inaccurate. That is inaccurate. When you hear that, that makes it sound as if the Russians are using human wave attacks. What is happening is the artillery, the multiple launch rocket systems, and the air power of the Russian military is what is grinding down the Ukrainian armed forces. That is the killer right now. Artillery and bombs. A former commander of the Ukrainian forces told Parliament in April that in certain sections of the front, Russians outnumbered Ukrainians by more than 7 to 1. Ukraine has struggled to recruit or draft more soldiers because of what critics say is a system mired in Soviet-style bureaucracy and corruption. Maybe. But what is also the big issue is that individuals don't want to be sent to the front and they don't want to die. The casualty rates are horrific. Earlier in the war, it was difficult to ascertain just how bad the casualties were. But as the war has progressed, this information has gotten out, and that is why you don't see the same number of volunteers. So most Ukrainians see basic training for conscripts as inadequate, a recent survey showed, leading some to avoid the draft, worried that they would not be prepared for combat. Now, again, I've talked about this a little bit, how the Ukrainian training process works. You essentially go to a training depot. You are then basically trained on how to shoot a rifle. You are somewhat trained in physical conditioning. You learn the basic military processes, and then you are then sent to your combat brigade. Now, at your combat brigade is where you're supposed to receive your more advanced training. Now, in an ideal landscape, you would have a combat brigade that is behind the line of contact that may replace another combat brigade in a period of months. Now, while that unit is getting ready to move forward to the front, that is when it would then train those new conscripts to be better soldiers. But that's not what's happening. These individuals go to that initial training depot, and then they find themselves on the front line with very, very little training and just getting pummeled by Russian artillery and Russian glide bombs and Russian precision-guided weapon systems. And that is what is happening. To address this issue, the Ukrainian parliament passed a law requiring all men under 60 to register at draft offices or online, with the goal of streamlining the mobilization process. The Defense Ministry said this month that 4.7 million had registered. The law offers a mix of financial incentives for those taking up arms and penalties for those trying to evade service. So it's also important to note that the information that we have as well is, let's say you are a Ukrainian soldier and you are wounded in battle. Maybe you lose a foot. You lose a foot from a small landmine. Well, you will initially be treated at a hospital by the Ukrainian military, or a hospital that is supporting the Ukrainian military. There are massive amounts of casualties. Now, once you are then released from service, it's really up to yourself to take care of your own self. The Ukrainians don't have the same Department of Veterans Affairs where that soldier is going to receive reasonable, even reasonable, in some cases unreasonable, medical care. That's off the table. It's really up to the Ukrainian individual soldiers, his own ability and the ability of his family to support that soldier. Obviously, it's going to be very difficult for him to find work, so he is now a burden to his family because very little support is being given to those Ukrainian soldiers who are wounded. So essentially they are stabilized and then they are sent home. And then they have to take care of themselves after that. And that is very, very costly. So we're going to continue to watch what I would define as really a breakthrough northwest of Avdiivka as these Russian forces continue to press their attack. We're also going to continue to watch the envelopment operation that is taking place in the vicinity of New York and just south of Toretsk. Now, at the same time, let's go over to the other map here, and let's head down to the Middle East. So it is believed that the Iranians are planning a major assault against the Israelis. And we believe that it could involve both the Iranian armed forces launching missiles and drones against Israeli forces, but we're also hearing the possibility that both Syria and Hezbollah could take part in this military operation. Meaning we could see ballistic missiles and cruise missiles being fired by Iran from Iranian territory, and we could also see Hezbollah and even forces loyal to Hezbollah in Syria launching attacks against Israeli forces. Now look, some would believe that the Israeli army is having great difficulties in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli army, the Israeli armed forces, have shown a lot of restraint, mainly because of pressure by Washington. The Joseph Biden figurehead, Kamala Harris, the cackling idiot administration. So when that initial Iranian strike occurred, the Israelis were under a lot of pressure to limit their response. Now, what we're hearing now is that this next attack, it's highly likely that the Israelis will not withhold a strike against the Iranians. And this could entail a major operation by Israeli forces against Iran. Now, we've also heard that the Iranians are getting closer and closer to fielding a nuclear device. And at some point, it's also believed that we also could see a nuclear test by the Iranians. Now, when that's going to happen, hard to say. Difficult to say at this point. But it's something that's in the works, and we believe right now that the Iranians are closer to fielding a nuclear device than what is being reported in Western media. Now, a strike by the Iranians could occur over the weekend. It could occur within the next 24 to 48 hours. Some believe it's a little bit further than that because of the size and scope of the attack that the Iranians are preparing against the state of Israel. And what we also hear, obviously, is that the Iranians are just not going to go after military targets. They didn't limit themselves to military targets in the last strike. But this strike, the Iranians could go after more civilian, less hardened targets that the Israelis defend. Yes, the last strike by the Iranians could be construed as a failure. They were not able to penetrate the Israeli air defense systems. They worked. Israeli air defense systems worked. Now, are they going to work this time? Well, we'll see. It depends on the size and scope of the attack. It depends on the size and the scope of the attack that will take place from Lebanon and Syria. So we'll have to wait and see. But this has the chance of erupting into a major, massive conflict. So we're watching this very, very closely, and we will report as soon as operations start. Thank you for joining us. More to come very, very soon. As always, have yourself a good day.